My in-laws planned a weekend getaway for family only and told me I wasn't considered one yet. When I showed up at the resort with their oldest daughter's secret, her face went pale. "Why would you say that here?" she whispered. When Margaret texted me to say, "Hope you understand, sweetie, but this weekend is for family only," I smiled, locked my phone, and decided right then that understanding wasn't something they were going to get from me anymore. Luke leaned against the kitchen counter, phone still in his hand, sighing heavily. "I'll stay here with you," he said. I shook my head. "No," I told him. "Go. Let's see what family really means to them." He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. Maybe he knew I wasn't finished with this. Not by a long shot. The thing about the Rowans is that they operate under a shiny, polished surface. Outwardly, they're polite, well-mannered, old-money Southern charmers. But underneath, there's a pettiness, a way of making you feel small without ever raising their voices. It's in the way Margaret sets two tables at Thanksgiving, one for family and another smaller one for guests, and somehow, every year, I'm at the guest table. It's in the way Robert pretends not to hear me when I answer a question at dinner. It's in the way Celeste, the eldest, the golden girl, tightens her smile whenever I enter the room. Still, I played along for 3 years. Smiled, hosted showers, attended awkward Sunday brunches where Margaret corrected the way I held my silverware. I kept thinking, once Luke and I got married, it would change. I'd earn my place. But family isn't something you earn with people like them. You're either born into it, or you aren't. And I wasn't. What the Rowans didn't know was that about 6 months ago, I accidentally learned something about Celeste. Something she definitely didn't want getting out. I'd been picking Luke up from a bar downtown one night. He and his friends had a bachelor party for someone. I parked in the back lot near an alleyway, and that's when I saw her. Celeste. Standing with a man who wasn't her fiancé, Andrew. They weren't just talking. They were pressed against the brick wall, kissing like they hadn't seen each other in years. His hands were all over her. I was so stunned I just sat there, frozen behind the wheel. Later, I rationalized it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe if it was her, it was a one-time thing. None of my business. But a few weeks later, when I ran into her at a cafe, the same man walked by outside, and Celeste went stiff, face draining of color. That's when I knew. It wasn't a one-time mistake. I filed it away in the back of my mind. I wasn't planning to use it. At least, not until they made it clear they didn't see me as family. Not until they made it clear they never would. When Luke left for the weekend, I waited a few hours before I packed a small bag and headed to the Grove Park Inn. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sun dipping low over the mountains. The lobby smelled like wood smoke and lavender, and everywhere I looked, wealthy families lounged in expensive spa robes and golf shirts. I spotted them right away, the Rowans, seated at a large table on the patio, laughing over glasses of wine. Margaret in her pearls and pastel sweater set. Robert sipping a scotch. Celeste in a crisp white sundress, tossing her blonde hair like she was in a commercial. And Luke. My Luke. Sitting stiffly at the edge of the group, smiling politely but looking a little detached. I squared my shoulders and walked straight toward them. Margaret's face froze mid-laugh when she saw me. Robert set down his glass with a thud. Celeste blinked rapidly, as if she couldn't quite process that I was standing there. Luke stood up immediately. "Cassidy, what are you doing here?" I smiled sweetly, sliding into an empty chair beside him. "Oh, I just couldn't stay away from family." Margaret recovered first. "Well, dear, this weekend was supposed to be family only?" I finished for her. "Right. I know. I just thought, since we're getting married in a few months, it wouldn't hurt to get used to each other." The tension around the table was so thick it could have been sliced with a butter knife. Robert cleared his throat. Margaret's mouth pinched tight. But it was Celeste who looked the most uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, dabbing at her forehead with a cocktail napkin. I let the moment stretch out, let them stew in it. Then I turned casually to Celeste. "So," I said brightly. "How's Andrew?" "I haven't seen him around much lately." Celeste's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against her plate. Everyone's head snapped toward her. She forced a brittle laugh. He's great. Busy with work, you know." I tilted my head. "That's funny. Because when I saw you last month, you weren't with Andrew, were you?" Dead silence. Celeste's face drained of color so fast it was like watching milk spill across a table. What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft clinking of glassware around us. I smiled wider, resting my chin on my hand. "Just saying," I said lightly. "You might want to be a little more careful about where you go downtown. Asheville's a small place. You never know who might see you." Her eyes darted around, panic setting in. "Why would you say that here?" she hissed, leaning toward me. I sat back in my chair, shrugging. "Just making conversation." Their perfect little weekend had shattered in seconds. Morgan, the youngest sister, stared at Celeste with her mouth hanging open. Robert looked murderous. Margaret looked like she was about to faint. Luke sat frozen, looking between me and Celeste, pieces clicking into place in his mind. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The damage was done. I stood up slowly, brushing invisible dust off my jeans. "Well," I said, my voice syrupy sweet. "Y'all have a lovely weekend. Don't let me keep you." I turned and walked away, my heels clicking loudly on the stone patio, every step echoing through the stunned silence behind me. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like someone who finally decided enough was enough. I didn't even make it to my car before my phone started buzzing in my purse. Luke's name lit up the screen over and over. I ignored it, sliding into the driver's seat and gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even nervous. I felt calm in a way that scared me a little, like the part of me that kept trying to please them had finally, mercifully, died. The drive home was a blur of sunset and pine trees. Asheville streets, familiar and winding, passed by without me really noticing. By the time I pulled into our driveway, Luke was already there, pacing the porch like he didn't know what to do with himself. He rushed over as soon as I got out of the car. "Cass, what the heck was that?" His voice wasn't angry, just bewildered. Like he didn't recognize me for a second. I walked past him, up the steps and into the house, letting the door swing shut behind me. He followed. Inside, I dropped my bag by the door and turned to face him. "You know what it was," I said simply. "You humiliated them," he said, throwing his hands up. "In public." "They humiliated me first," I said, my voice low. "For 3 years. In private. In front of you." Luke opened his mouth, then closed it again. He sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand through his hair. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You should have told me." I sank into the armchair across from him, exhausted. "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. "Would you have believed me if I said your perfect sister was screwing around on her fiancé?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I already knew. The fallout came faster than I expected. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls and several long, furious texts from Margaret. Words like disrespectful, disgraceful, and trashy flashed across my screen. She accused me of making up lies to tear their family apart because I was jealous. Jealous. That word stuck in my brain like a splinter. As if I wanted what they had. As if I envied their cold, brittle love. Luke stayed silent through most of it. He didn't defend his family, but he didn't exactly defend me, either. By noon, he finally said, "Maybe you should apologize. Just to smooth things over." I stared at him, feeling something in my chest cave in. "You want me to apologize," I said slowly, "for telling the truth?" He looked miserable. This is spiraling. If you just said you were sorry for bringing it up the way you did, maybe we could all move past it. I stood up, heart pounding. You know what, Luke? Maybe you should stay over there with your family this weekend. Since you're so eager to be part of their version of the truth. I left before he could answer, grabbing my purse and keys, slamming the door harder than necessary. I ended up at a little coffee shop downtown, the kind that smelled like burnt espresso and worn leather. It was almost empty, just a few students with laptops and an old man reading a newspaper. I sank into a booth and stared out the window, watching rain start to drizzle down over the street. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt powerful. Instead, I just felt tired. My whole life, I'd dreamed of being part of a big, close-knit family. Dinners, holidays, matching pajamas at Christmas. But the Rowans weren't a family. They were a performance. A stage play that only worked as long as everyone knew their lines and stuck to the script. I hadn't forgotten my lines. I'd just decided I wasn't willing to play the part anymore. Later that night, Luke showed up at the coffee shop. I watched him approach through the rain-smeared glass, his head down, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. He slid into the booth across from me, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, I left the resort. I told them I'm not coming back. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. They're furious, he said. They're saying you made the whole thing up. Of course they are, I said. If they admit it's true, they lose their narrative. He reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on mine. I believe you, he said quietly. I believe you saw what you saw. It was what I had needed to hear days ago. It was what I had needed to hear 3 years ago. I pulled my hand back gently. That's not the point anymore, I said. He looked at me like he didn't understand. The point, I said, feeling tears prickling at the backs of my eyes, is that I should never have had to fight this hard to be seen. To be respected. By you, or by them. The silence between us stretched long and wide. I'm not mad that they didn't want me on their trip, I said. I'm mad that you didn't either. His mouth opened. Closed. He had no words. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. I didn't go back home with him that night. I stayed with a friend, sleeping in a guest room that smelled like lavender and clean laundry, wrapped in a quilt that felt like safety. I ignored Luke's texts. I ignored Margaret's desperate, furious voicemails, shifting from threats to sobs to demands that I explain myself. I ignored Celeste's one-line email, please don't ruin everything. It was already ruined. They had just never noticed the cracks before. The following week passed in slow motion. I went back to work, throwing myself into spreadsheets and meetings, doing everything possible to avoid thinking about Luke or the Rowans. Every night, my phone lit up with new messages. Luke asking if we could talk. Margaret sending guilt-laced texts about how much we love you, Cassidy, despite your mistakes. Mistakes. I didn't answer any of them. On Wednesday afternoon, I got home to find Luke sitting on the steps of my friend's porch, a duffel bag beside him. His face looked hollowed out, like he hadn't slept. His jacket was soaked from the drizzle that had been falling all day. He stood when he saw me, wiping his palms on his jeans nervously. I moved out, he said. I told them I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not picking sides between my future wife and my mother. It should have felt satisfying. It should have felt like I'd won something. Instead, I just felt sad. He followed me inside, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, and sat stiffly on the edge of the couch while I made tea. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. I'm not asking you to forgive them, he said when I finally sat down. I just want us back. Us. Back. As if we could rewind the tape and erase all the ways he stood by while they carved me down to size, piece by piece. I stared at him, really stared, seeing him not as the man I fell in love with, but as the man he had become, or maybe, always was. A man who wanted peace more than justice. A man who would rather patch the cracks with apologies than fix the foundation. Meanwhile, the Rowans weren't done. The next morning, a letter arrived at my friend's house. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. Handwritten, in Margaret's looping cursive on expensive cream stationery. She called me vindictive. She accused me of jealousy again. She said she forgave me, even though she didn't have to, because that's what family does. At the bottom, she wrote, "I hope, for Luke's sake, you find the grace to grow into someone we can be proud of." I laughed out loud when I read that. A dry, humorless laugh that sounded strange even to my own ears. Grow into someone they could be proud of. As if my existence, my worth, had ever been something they measured like a report card. Luke found me reading the letter at the kitchen counter, cup of tea forgotten and cold beside me. He looked at the envelope, at my face, and said, "You can burn it if you want. But burning it wouldn't fix anything." The fire wasn't outside anymore, it was inside me now. A slow, steady burn I couldn't turn off. 2 days later, Margaret escalated. She showed up at my work. I was sitting in the break room eating a sad little salad when I saw her reflection in the vending machine glass. Pale pink blazer, pearls tied around her neck, clutching her designer handbag like it might save her from sinking. I stood up so fast my chair screeched across the tile. "Margaret," I said, keeping my voice low and polite, because my boss was 5 feet away at the coffee machine. "Cassidy," she said, smiling thinly. "Can we speak privately?" I wanted to say no. God, I wanted to say no. But instead, I walked with her out to the parking lot, into the humid spring air, where we stood under the gray sky like two duelists waiting for the first shot. Margaret wasted no time. "You are tearing this family apart," she said. "You are making Luke choose between his blood and you." "I didn't make him choose anything," I said. "I just refused to keep pretending." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Luke belongs with his family," she said. "He has a future here. A real one. We can make sure he's taken care of. Successful. Connected." I blinked. It wasn't even subtle. She wasn't just warning me. She was bribing me. "Walk away," she was saying, "and Luke gets everything. Stay, and he gets nothing." I stared at her, this woman who cared more about control than about love, and realized, with a painful clarity, that this was never about me being good enough. It was about me never being theirs. When I didn't answer, Margaret took out a slim white envelope from her purse and held it out to me. "I hope you make the right decision," she said. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. I dropped it into the trash can outside the building without even glancing inside. Some things, once seen clearly, can't be unseen. That night, Luke and I sat on opposite sides of the living room again. He knew something had shifted. I could see it in the way he kept glancing at me like he was trying to find the right words to build a bridge he already knew I wasn't going to cross. He started to speak twice, but both times the words caught in his throat. Finally, I said it for him. "This isn't about Celeste," I said. "Or Margaret. Or the trip. It's about the fact that when they told me I wasn't family, you didn't correct them. You didn't stand up for me until it was too late." He put his head in his hands, rubbing his temples like he could make sense of it all. "I didn't know what to do," he said. "I know," I said quietly. "And that's the problem." The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the whole world was holding its breath. Luke stayed, hovering around the house like a ghost, doing the dishes, folding the laundry, trying to build a life back out of broken pieces. But he never said the one thing I needed to hear. Not "I see it now." Not "I should have protected you." Just silence, and sad glances, and too many cups of tea left untouched. Meanwhile, the Rowans didn't give up. Margaret sent another letter, this one dripping with faux forgiveness. She said she was willing to move past this unfortunate misunderstanding if I was willing to apologize for my outburst. Celeste sent a bouquet of white lilies with a card that simply said peace. It was almost funny. They were trying to pretend the explosion had never happened, as if a few polite gestures could erase years of resentment and weeks of chaos. But they didn't know me. Not really. I wasn't interested in peace. I was interested in the truth. A week later, Celeste's fiancé, Andrew, reached out. A short, formal message on Facebook. "Hey. Can we talk?" I hesitated for a full day before answering. I knew whatever conversation we had would light a fuse under everything. But the fuse had already been lit, hadn't it? We met at a public coffee shop, neutral ground. Andrew was stiff, polite, wearing a pressed shirt and a forced smile. He got straight to the point. "I heard there's been some talk," he said. "About Celeste." I didn't deny it. I just looked him in the eye and said, "You deserve the truth." And then I told him everything. The alleyway. The man she was kissing. The panicked look when I caught her at the cafe weeks later. I even pulled up a picture on my phone, a blurry, grainy photo I'd snapped months ago when I first saw them, thinking I'd never need it. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to show Celeste wasn't the person she pretended to be. Andrew sat there, stone-faced, for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I always knew something was off. I just didn't want to believe it." He paid for his coffee, stood up, and left without another word. The Rowans' house of cards collapsed 2 days later. Word spread fast in their community, small, tight-knit, judgmental. Andrew called off the engagement publicly, citing irreconcilable differences. It wasn't hard for people to guess the rest. Celeste moved back in with Margaret and Robert almost immediately. The perfect daughter, back under their roof, the shame hanging over them like a cloud they couldn't scrub clean. Margaret tried to spin it, of course. Whispered to mutual friends that Andrew had cold feet, that Celeste was devastated. But in a town like ours, people have long memories. And rumors, once seeded, grow fast. Their precious image was shattered, not by me, but by their own lies finally catching up to them. As for Luke and me? We sat across from each other one last time, in the same kitchen where we had shared late-night talks and early morning coffees. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough. "For not being who you needed me to be." It was genuine. I believed he meant it. But it wasn't enough. Because forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And trust, once cracked, never fits back together the same way. "I love you," I said. "And I love who we were. But not who we are now." He didn't fight me. He just nodded, tears in his eyes, and helped me pack the last of my things into my car. We hugged once, tightly, for everything we were losing and everything we could no longer pretend to have. And then I drove away. In the months that followed, I built a new life. Small at first, a tiny apartment downtown, a job promotion I fought hard for, Saturday mornings spent in farmers' markets instead of awkward family brunches. I found peace not in revenge, but in freedom. In knowing I had finally chosen myself. And every so often, I'd hear whispers through the grapevine. Margaret at church, trying desperately to repair her reputation. Robert growing more and more bitter. Celeste, now known more for wrongdoing than society luncheons. The Rowans still played their game, but fewer people showed up to watch. And me? I wasn't part of their world anymore. I had something better, a life that wasn't built on begging for approval. A heart that wasn't waiting for scraps. A future where I was enough, no permission needed. It's been almost a year now since everything happened. Sometimes, when I'm walking through downtown Asheville, past the same coffee shops and bookstores where I used to meet Luke, past the park where I once imagined our wedding photos being taken, I still feel a pang. Not regret. Just the memory of a different life I thought I was building. Luke and I haven't spoken since the day I left. No angry texts, no last desperate phone calls. Just silence. The kind of silence that respects the ending, even if it wasn't the one we imagined. I heard through mutual friends that he moved to Charlotte, started over. I'm glad for him, truly. Sometimes two people can love each other and still be completely wrong together. As for the Rowans, I heard Margaret still hosts her grand Sunday dinners, but fewer people show up now. Celeste is dating someone new, quieter, less flashy. Their family's reputation took a hit that time won't easily heal. But honestly, I don't think about them much anymore. I think about the life I'm building instead. I started taking pottery classes on Saturday mornings, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. I made new friends, real friends, people who don't care about my last name or how many forks are on the dinner table. I travel sometimes, even if it's just a weekend trip to Charleston or a drive down the Blue Ridge Parkway. For the first time in years, I wake up excited for my own life. Not the life someone else decided I should have. If there's anything I've learned, it's this: sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's surviving. Thriving. Living a life so full and real that the people who tried to break you don't even get to be part of the story anymore. And when I think about Margaret and her careful, curated version of family, I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Because the real tragedy isn't that I walked away. It's that she never realized what she lost.